Good morning, everyone. My name is Gratia Ilibagiza, and this morning I'll be presenting my research proposal titled Tera, Song, Dance, and Performance in Gihozo Rwandan Cultural Dance Group. I am supervised by Professor Gobodo-Madikizela, who's with us today through the Center for the Study of the Afterlife of Violence and Reparative Quest, and in the Department of Social Anthropology. So I'll begin my presentation by my main research question, which I framed as, how might the curation of songs and dances in Gihozo be a useful way of understanding the experiences of Impunzi? From this main research question, I have 4 critical questions that have emerged so far. First, how are songs and dances curated in Gihozo? Second, what songs are curated in Gihozo? What dances are curated in Gihozo? And finally, how do members of Gihozo group understand the identification of Impunzi? I was born in Rwanda in November '93 and separated within a few months shortly after the war in April '94. I have not been physically back since, but I have returned to the country in numerous ways. I've returned to Rwanda through its language of Kinyarwanda, taught and spoken by my siblings and I by our parents. I have returned to Rwanda through the community of Impunzi z'Abanyarwanda and the many funerals, weddings, births, and celebrations that have occasioned our coming together. Most beautifully, however, I've returned to Rwanda through traditional dance and song, a distinct thread that has run through all the latter experiences of return. I began dancing at the age of 10 in Gihozo Rwandan traditional dance group. Gihozo is Kinyarwanda for consolation, and the group describes itself as a Johannesburg-based cultural group, which began in 2004, comprising of Impunzi who live in the Gauteng region, and who were interested at the time in using cultural dance as a means of maintaining ties and identification to Rwanda after the war. The dance group, which meets for regular practice or kwitoza on Sunday afternoons, became a place and space for me to begin to reflect on what my own relationship to Rwanda was. In previous framings of my work, I had to do a lot of conceptual grappling around using the term refugee. I began with Agamben's notion of bare life and the refugee as a biopolitical subject, and then moved on to Wahelia's concept of afterman. In these attempts, I was trying to locate my own experiences in the aftermath of the apocalyptic ruptures of war in Rwanda, albeit as an infant, and the social and geographical displacements that it has continued to produce thereafter. For me, the term Impunzi collapses categorical hierarchies and preoccupations with proof. Impunzi is about an experiential condition of exile that is not limited to time, space, or the nation. It is a self-aware identification that expresses exile. Narahunze, I fled, I left, is concerted in its action and deliberate. It is a response to conditions that have caused one to leave a particular space or time, fully knowledgeable and fully aware. Therefore, I am interested in the dances in Gihozo and how they inscribe narratives of time and self as Rwandan into time. My theoretical framework so far has involved thinking with authors who have written about languaging identity and who can support the conceptual theorizing I want to do with terms like Impunzi and the moving body in Kinyarwanda. So most notably, these 2 main theoretical frameworks I've been working with are ideas around identity versus identification and flesh and the body. So with regards to identity and identification, I mostly engaged with Brubaker and Frederick and how they critique uses of the term identity as an analytical concept because of its ambiguity and its lack of grounding with regards to the conceptual and explanatory work the term is often expected to do. For the purposes of my research, I will try and align with the term identification rather to emphasize the processes and action of making one identifiable and thus having an identity, rather than presupposing a Rwandan Impunzi identity. It follows then that Impunzi becomes an identification for people who are engaged in the actions and processes of contesting culture outside of the space from which they have been injected. ejected. These actions and processes are made sense of through song and dance in exile, away from the geographical land of Rwanda. With regards to flesh and the body, I quote Wahilia when he writes and says, "In the absence of kin, family, gender, belonging, language, personhood, property, and official records, among many other factors, what remains is the flesh, the living, speaking, thinking, feeling, and imagining flesh, the ether that holds together the world of man, while at the same time forming the condition of possibility for this world's demise." The flesh that Wahilia posits for me becomes the interlace of the body and the psychosocial mind. Wahilia qualifies the body as representing legal personhood through self-possession. Impunzi, who are denied legal personhood and self-possession, then work from the space and place of their flesh in remembering self. The flesh becomes the new space to create, reimagine, inscribe, and experience the past, presents, and futures. Flesh is alive when it becomes political, and more importantly, when it expresses through the body it can contest. In making sense of song, dance, and performance, I find this a useful way of framing my understanding of the temporal, spatial, and body-flesh configuration of members of Dihozo, and how these are iterated through lyrics, dance styles, conversations, intergenerational transmissions of these modes, and political value. Currently, the group comprises just under 15 members. These members are made up mostly of mothers and their children who participate and dance. The group has seen a significant decrease in the members over the last 2 years and no longer has any male dancers above the age of 18. So I will be conducting my method with the current members. And these will mostly comprise of older girls as well as their mothers where possible. So my method in approach for my research is going to be largely ethnographic and autoethnographic because of my discipline in anthropology, but it will also consider my role there as both dancer and chairperson. So I've outlined some of the key aspects of my method, which are participant observation, ethnographic field notes, a personal research diary, and some narrative interviews. So participation observation is an anthropological method where the researcher is immersed in the field. And I thought this was particularly interesting for me because I'm already a member of the group and the broader Rwandan Impunzi community in Johannesburg. And so I'll be taking part in dance practices and choreography as I usually do, but I'll be assuming and clarifying my role as researcher so that I may more actively observe and record the happenings in the group. With regards to the ethnographic field notes, these are a useful way of providing contextual backdrop of details such as space, time, and texture of practice sessions. They allow for a richness in detail that is not often captured through interviews and even visual media. My personal research diary will be a way of documenting my own ideas and feelings during practices, choreography, and performances. This is part of my autoethnographic documentation and a way of separating my own personal experiences in the research from those of the members of the group. This, I think, will also help me make sense of my own biases and observations in relation to those other members in the group. The narrative interviews I'll be conducting, I plan with approximately 5 and not more members of the group, excluding myself. And in these interviews, I'll be asking questions that probe the relationships the members of the group have with the songs and dances they participate and curate in. Through these questions, I hope that members will be able to reflect on their own connection to Rwanda and the cultural identity thereof, as well as their lives as Impunzi in South Africa. Finally, the ethical considerations that I have begun to think about is primarily around notions of working with Impunzi or refugees and how they are often seen as a vulnerable category. So although this may be a very valid concern, Dihozo members participate freely in the group. They are members who have lived in South Africa for more than 10 years. And also as a young Rwandan, figuring my own way around the language and making that a very focused part of my research methodology.